Welcome to today's Alumni Career Services webinar, hosted by the Georgetown University Alumni Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for Salary Negotiation 101 with Hallie Crawford, Certified Career Coach, Speaker, Author, and National Career Expert. I'm Allie Heel, the Regional Engagement Coordinator in Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's session. As a reminder, you may use the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel to submit your questions throughout the session or to let me know if you're having any technical issues. Now, on to our presenter. As I mentioned, Hallie Crawford is a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert with over 21 years of experience. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. She is regularly featured in the media, Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal, and has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 2,000 success stories, her team of coaches and resume writers help professionals find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning and go to work. Without further ado, I am pleased to turn things over to Hallie.
Thank you, Allie. Greatly appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and taking time out of your day to learn more about this apparently very hot topic, understandably, because of everything that's going on with the economy and so many people changing positions. And I was telling Allie this morning too, I've got my funky glasses on as well. She says that I'm very hip and cool with them. I didn't intend to be, but I got lucky, I guess, today. So we are going to be talking about Salary Negotiation 101 and some basics to help you get started with this process. As Allie said, I'm Hallie Crawford. I'm a certified career coach. We are based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been coaching and training for just over 22 years now. There's a lot more gray hair going on back here than we can't see on camera necessarily. The advice that we're going to give you today is advice that we give to our clients, and we are passionate about helping people get into the right career fit. And understandably, part of, or a big part of the right career fit is compensation and getting the salary that you deserve, that you want, that fits for your situation, etc. So obviously that's what we're going to be talking about today. So why is this topic such a big one? If we take a look at this next slide, and then I'll show you what our agenda is today in just a moment. Salary negotiation, it can be stressful for even people who are experts at it and really good at it. It's usually not people's most favorite thing. There are lots of different reasons for this, understandably. The sense, people just get nervous about it. They worry and are concerned that it's going to be like some sort of conflict, and it's like one way or the highway, and it's just not going to work out as they want to. Some of the other reasons people feel stressed about salary negotiation is some of us have this sense of imposter syndrome, where we're unable or less able to kind of give ourselves credit for the work that we do and sell ourselves effectively. And some people feel like it's stressful because it's they're unsure, understandably, how to ask and what to say during the course of the conversation. And the goal is to not be like the woman on this screen, although I would kind of argue that she only looks partially stressed. A different image of someone who's much more stressed than this is probably more appropriate. But the goal with this salary negotiation conversation that you need to have is to really be yourself, but sell yourself at the same time. And what we tell our clients kind of right out of the box is that you want it to be a conversation, a two-way street. And the goal, like kind of big picture, is you don't want it to feel like, it's one, like you're at opposite ends of the table or the spectrum kind of arguing about something, that you want it to be as open-ended and direct and honest and transparent of a conversation as possible. So try to have it be a two-way street. That's how you want to set it up, and obviously what we're going to be talking about today too. One thing to know to help you alleviate that stress a little bit more is to keep in mind that managers expect negotiation. They always expect it. Unless for some reason, if up front during the interview process, they've said, look, this is our number, we cannot change it, so just know that up front, the majority of the time they're going to expect people to negotiate, okay? If you take a look at the research on this slide, most senior managers say they expected negotiating from candidates, and most professionals usually, more than half try to negotiate a higher salary with their most recent job offer. I think these numbers are even higher these days, given that it's an employee's market or job seekers market. So the numbers are probably a little bit higher than this too. So it's expected, it's normal, everyone knows about it, okay? So here's our agenda for today. What we're going to be discussing is on this next slide. I'll give you 10 tips to help you prepare for the salary negotiation. This is a really big part of it because making the ask, yes, is important in terms of what you say, how you present yourself, your nonverbals, everything else. But that preparation in advance is going to make everything else so much more smooth. We're going to give you some specific action steps and encourage you to take notes while we're talking. We will have Q&A at the end. We'll get answer, I should say, as many questions as we can today as possible, as time allows. And just FYI, if anyone would like a copy of the slides, they can just email us at the email address at the bottom of the slide here. It's admin@halliecrawford.com, and maybe Allie can put that in the chat box or the Q&A box for you so you have it. So happy to give you the slides if needed. All right, couple of things to think about in addition to you want the salary negotiation to be a conversation. The things that we want you to think about, kind of three main steps, if you will, as we get into our tips, is to make sure you prepare really, really well. Conduct research, review your accomplishments, prepare a PowerPoint if that's appropriate, or some kind of document that you can kind of walk through why you feel you deserve this X amount of salary, whatever it is, okay? Anticipate the red flags that the prospective employer might have. Why might they object to the salary that you're asking? What are their concerns? And then be confident in your ask. Communicate effectively, clearly, concisely, assertively, all of that good stuff, okay? So let's get into our 10 tips. So number one, in terms of preparing, is gonna be to be really clear about understanding what your accomplishments are and how they are tied to the bottom line of the organization that you're interviewing for. And one way to be doing that, especially if you're in job search mode right now, is to record your accomplishments. And we have our clients have or create like an accomplishments document that's on the desktop of their computer. So they can write down accomplishments outside of their resume, like things that measurable results that may not be mentioned on their resume because there wasn't enough space, but they would be specific to this particular position that they're looking at. Testimonials or compliments from clients or their boss, awards, classes, projects, any other experience that may be not highlighted as much on your resume as you would like, but things that you want to mention during the course of the interview and maybe even during the course of the salary negotiation. Okay, and then you can identify the top items that you want to reference, whether you create like a quick little script that you're going to use, or if you've got a quick little PowerPoint presentation, for example, in one of the interviews that you want to present to them and say, look, here are the 5 reasons why I'm asking for this higher salary. It could be something that you send to them. It could be something that you present. It may just be something that is verbal, but you want to think of it as a concise conversation where you're presenting, so to speak, the right information so that you're negotiating effectively, bottom line there. So this accomplishments document is something that's actually good to have in the long run for your career path, so you're keeping track of things that you may forget otherwise, okay? So that's tip number one, is to record those accomplishments. Number 2 is obviously to make sure that your resume and your LinkedIn profile is up to date. If you are in the throes, for example, of job searching or in the midst of negotiating like right now or interviewing for a potential job, you do want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date, even for that specific position a little bit more, because they're going to go back and forth, maybe looking at your profile in addition to your resume, okay? And when you're preparing for any sort of job application process, obviously, or in the midst of job seeking, both of these documents or materials, if you will, they need to be completely up to date and sell you effectively. Now, a couple of things that we wanted to point out here, and then we'll get to our first poll in just a moment here. Some of the things because of COVID that we want people to keep in mind as part of this negotiation and part of what are some important accomplishments is maybe some of those COVID specific skills or strengths that you demonstrated or attained during the past few years. If you're really good at working remotely and the job that you're applying for is going to be partially remote or requires you to be a leader for a remote team, these are things that you want to bring up and mention. Leading teams remotely, crisis management, change management. There's been a lot of change in the past few years. So also when you're thinking about your negotiation, make sure that you're speaking to the specific position, again, in terms of, you know, whether it's remote and kind of what would be really timely and relevant for this particular job. You want to make sure you update your resume and LinkedIn for any of your accomplishments to date, including those COVID accomplishments, so put them on your materials too. And obviously personalize your resume each time you're applying for a job, for the position you want to go for, etc. Okay, so let's go ahead and Allie, if we could launch our first poll, that would be great. One of the things we always tell our clients is we want them to keep their resume and their LinkedIn profile up to date at all times. Now, if you're in job searching mode, obviously you're doing that more now, and that makes perfect sense. If for any reason you're not and you're thinking about getting into job search mode, we just want you to keep your resume up to date, like quarterly, every 6 months, something like that, because it's so much easier to keep it up to date and keep track of these accomplishments, like we said, so you don't forget them, versus panic mode when you're about to apply and you have to put everything on there and you may have forgotten some things. So thanks for doing our poll, everybody. And Allie, if you could read me the results, that's one other thing I always can't find on the on the taskbar of GoToWebinar.
Sure, absolutely. So the answers came in at about 44% of people responding yes, that they regularly keep their resume and LinkedIn up to date, and 56% saying no.
Okay, it's understandable. I am guilty as charged. I don't always do this myself either. It's really, really important to do so. And what we found in a good way is that more and more people are keeping it up to date. I think that they're realizing how important, obviously, career progression is. Let's look at tip number 3 and reading kind of the room of what's going on. If for some reason you're here today to talk about negotiating for a higher salary or promotion at your current company, just kind of throwing some of that in there too. But pay attention to like reading the room of the industry or company that you're trying to get into. Are they thriving? Are they struggling? Are they, you know, actively hiring or not? Because that can give you a sense of how much more you can ask for when you're negotiating. So you want to not just be blind to whatever is going on within the industry, and keep that in mind when you're doing your salary research and you're thinking about your ask. Keep in mind that you may have to have some flexibility there, up or down a little bit, depending on what's going on within that industry. And as part of your preparation, it's a really good idea to consider if they can't give you as much money as you would like to ask for, are there other things that you would be interested in that would be okay for you, like remote work, a different title, a bonus, maybe performance-based after 3 or 6 months? We want you to ask them if they can't give you the money right then. If you could, for example, reevaluate that in 3 months or 6 months, if you could schedule or, you know, ask them to have a conversation with you, and would it be possible in that time frame? So different things that you can ask for. It's good to be prepared to be flexible just in case, but think in advance of what you could ask for. Just really quickly before we get to this one, we had a client, and this was actually pre-COVID, but she's just a really good, easy example. They could get as close, very close to her salary range, but we're 2,000 under still. And they just said, look, that's as far as we can go after or during the course of the negotiations. So she said, look, can I work from home every Friday then? And they agreed to that. So again, you want it to be a two-way street in a conversation as much as possible. Let's talk about tip number 4 and the salary research. You want to research the standard salary for both the desired position, the position you're interviewing for, okay? But you also want to research it for your current position as well. People usually do it just for the job they're going for, but it's important to know as well where you stand in your current job, because some clients have come to us, for example, and they'll say, I know that my organization pays more than most other organizations within my industry. You need to know that going in, or if it's vice versa, because you can't just go in blindly and assume, okay, I'm making this, so I need to make this much more. You need to understand where you stand within your industry as well, based on location, et cetera, too. So tip number 4 as part of your salary research is to do both of those things. We like sites like glassdoor.com, payscale.com, and indeed.com for salary research. There could be others out there that I just don't know about yet. Please feel free to share those in the Q&A. We'd love to hear about them. I do know that LinkedIn is working on their own salary research feature. I don't know when it's coming out. They let us know things kind of in advance because we're in the industry, but I think that one will be fantastic. You could also, in addition to the research, ask a mentor or colleagues maybe at other organizations that are similar to yours, like, what are you making? Like, get kind of a feel there. And if you're uncomfortable, understandably, saying exactly how much money do you make, depending on how well you know the person, you can ask them for a range. Hey, I'm thinking about this. Is that within the range that I should be asking for? If you're going for a promotion, and even during the course of your interview process and negotiating process, you can find out what their company policy is for raises. So for example, if they say, no, not right now, we can't do more, that's one of the questions you can ask, is say, what's the company policy for raises and how often does that happen? Is it annual, et cetera, et cetera? And you can ask them what kind of wiggle room they have. So during the course of the conversation as well, you can say, what is the salary range for this position? I'm thinking about this. Does that fit within the range that is budgeted for this position? Again, asking questions and not just saying something and then that's it will help set it up for more of a two-way street conversation, which again is what we're going for, okay? As part of your salary research too, these are some of the things that you can say and think about or do during the course of your negotiation too. So for example, instead of literally just saying, how much money will I make? One of the ways to ask what the salary is for a job is, what is the benefits package offered? And then they can tell you everything. Another thing that you can say is there flexibility in what is budgeted for this position? You can ask that along the way during the course of the interview process. And when they are asking you what you currently make, unless you're concerned about coming across as overqualified or pricing yourself out of that job because you'll expect too much money, you can add up your total compensation, including all of your benefits, so that the number is a little bit higher. Now you have to be honest about it, and you can say, my total compensation or my total benefits package adds up to this amount, okay? We already talked about remote work a little bit, okay? So we don't need to go into that in great detail. But one of the things too, just kind of going back to employers potentially asking what you currently make or what your current compensation is, it's a good idea to know what the laws are about asking that question within your state. Because in some states, that question technically is illegal, and it's good to just know what that is so that you can handle it appropriately as you go, okay? So know the laws in your state and do your homework there. Tip number 5 is to take other perks into consideration. And I say this to kind of piggyback on what we said earlier about being flexible with your ask. Are there other things outside of just money that would be important to you and helpful to you? These are some other ones that we would add to the list that you could consider asking. But we want you to keep in mind that in some cases, for example, a privately held company is not going to have stock options. You may not be getting, deposits or matching in your retirement account. So some of these will be more relevant than others depending on the organization. But these are some other things that you could consider at least having the discussion of. They might say no, they might say not now, but these are some of the other options that you could at least, talk about and say, look, I understand you can't do this and we're at your bottom line there. Could we discuss some of these other options, things that would be meaningful to you, to ask them and see, what they say, okay? So tip number 5 is take other things into consideration. Tip number 6 is to be confident in your ask. So with this one, we're gonna start moving a little bit closer to, how you make the ask and how you handle the conversation in the first place. It's critically important prior to this conversation or email conversation that you're about to have with them that you're coming from a really confident but also calm and less nervous place. We all know how important our attitude is and how much they influence our attitude and kind of mental state, so to speak, influences our actions, okay? So our attitude affects our actions, which in turn affects our outcome. The majority of the time, taking a look at the slide here on the second bullet point, most of our clients, just FYI, you're not alone, will say that they are their biggest obstacle to their success. They get nervous during these conversations, let's say. Some people say they clam up and they talk less. Other people will tell us that they'll talk more. That's where I fall into. I tend to talk a little bit too much. So you want to make sure that you do things in advance of the conversation, not just to prepare effectively and have kind of the taglines of the things that you want to say and ask for, but also do things in advance of the conversation that boost your confidence, whether it's preparing an affirmation, visualizing how you want that conversation to go. We love this one because that gets kind of everything aligned, body, mind, energy, everything else. Your attire is important, not just if it's on video, but even if it's not on video and it's just phone, let's say, you want to dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. So err a little bit more, I think, on it's not just about being more formal, but dressing in a way that makes you feel confident, sharp, and appropriate for this next level of position that you're going for. That will help boost your confidence too. It could be like a music playlist that you listen to in advance, etc. This is where we want you to have some support and supportive people who can practice this conversation with you, etc., to help boost your confidence. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. And just by the way, and the last bullet point here on this slide is to help you be a little bit more confident. Please know that it's okay to have notes in front of you when you're having this conversation. It's okay to have notes to the side that remind you of a couple of things that you may want to say, and even to take notes, while you're having that conversation too. Again, we don't want this to be some really tense, kind of difficult conversation. Part of you going into it is taking control and charge a little bit of how the conversation goes, and again, keeping it a two-way street. So having notes for yourself is totally okay to kind of double check and even say, let me double check something if I could for just a moment, because I had some other ideas and things I wanted to talk through. Something like that is completely reasonable. And I will say one other thing before we get to this next slide. If you tend to be the type of person who talks too much when you get nervous, for those of you that are like this, one of the things we recommend you do, in addition to the preparing, is to just literally slow yourself down when you're talking. Slow down a little bit more. That will help you be more mindful of what you're saying. Pause if you need to know if it's time to keep talking or not. And so we just find deep breathing, sitting up straight, and slowing down the cadence of your conversation, even in the first place, can help you be more mindful of talking or sharing too much. That can help enormously. So bottom line, just slow down. It'll help you be more mindful. As part of tip number 6 and being more confident, if any of you feel like you struggle with the imposter syndrome, which is defined on this next slide, if you feel like your success is due to luck, you have a hard time kind of internalizing and selling your accomplishments, some of the things that you may want to do, and honestly, these tips go for any of the negative thoughts that you might have about salary negotiation or fears or anything else. We call these gremlins in coaching. There's a great book that we suggest to our clients called Taming Your Gremlin. And some of those suggestions from that book are on this slide. You can push aside those negative thoughts, talk back to them, review your list of accomplishments, practice your ask in front of the mirror so that you see how you're coming across, or even videotape yourself. Get coaching on it. There's lots of different things that you can do to help with the imposter syndrome, but also to move those negative thoughts aside and look at them more objectively, whatever your fears or concerns are, so you can say to yourself, okay, wait a minute, what's the worst case scenario here? that I don't get exactly what I want, for example, am I okay with that? What am I okay with kind of within reason? It'll help you be more objective and realistic and practical about it, okay? So tip number 6 is to be confident. Tip number 7 is, as part of your ask, you want to identify and be clear on not just what your tangible strengths are related to asking for, more money, but be clear about and tell them about your leadership strengths as well. Include these soft skills in the PowerPoint that you present or just in the conversation that you have. So to let them know too that you are able, for example, not just to complete the tasks that they want you to perform and you understand their software or whatever it is, but hey, by the way, I've got these soft skills too, because those are a really big deal for employers. Then they can help tip the scales in your favor. You can motivate other people. You are great at taking a leadership role in meetings or in your team. You can handle conflict effectively. Those are the types of things that you want to bring up in the conversation as well. COVID strengths we already talked about. And we like it when during the course of the interview process, whether it's you present it or talk about it during the course of your salary negotiation or prior to that, we like our clients to present a very brief 30, 60, 90-day plan of what they would do to hit the ground running if they were hired for that job. It's really impressive for employers. It shows you've thought things through, and it shows them how you would kind of paints the picture, if you will, of what it would be like if they hired you, which is exactly what they're trying to find out, and you want it to be impressive, obviously. With your leadership strengths, if you're not sure what any of those are, we included in our slides for today this leadership wheel from Development Dimensions International. It's a tongue twister. They assert that these are our top leadership strengths for today's economy. And it's a good idea to rate yourself in each area and identify what those top 3 areas are of strength. We really like it when our clients interview other people about it and ask them to rate them too, just so you get, a different perspective on that and are being sure to be realistic, et cetera, et cetera. So we like this leadership wheel for a lot of reasons. These are the things that you can say, look, not only, for example, am I great at these 5 things, the top things that you require here, I'm a really good team player for these reasons, or I'm also fantastic at managing change, and this is part of what you need on this team for these reasons, and this is part of why I'm asking for more money. Again, reasons tied to the bottom line that you should be asking for more money and deserve it. Tip number 8 is to prepare your presentation, so to speak. And please know that when I've been saying this all along as a presentation, the presentation doesn't have to be some formal thing necessarily. It could just be, the email that you send to them if you all are negotiating via email, for example. And it could be preparing that in advance and what to include. It could be a more formal presentation because let's say, for example, the employer wants to talk with you about negotiating salary. And this is something that you could send over to them and maybe show them during the course of the conversation you have. It kind of depends on how the interview process has been going for you so far and how formal or informal it is, okay? But when you're preparing your presentation, even if it's more of just a verbal conversation, these are some of the things that you could consider including, again, depending on how the conversation has gone to date. Including or incorporating your resume again, or parts of your resume that would be especially relevant and important. Projects and results that maybe you all haven't talked about yet, but you wanted to bring to their attention. Again, evidence of accomplishments tied to the value provided, numbers and results for your work. It could be a quick portfolio of your experience and skills and some of the marketing campaigns you've worked on, for example, and how good they were. And anything else, kudos or recommendations from people. It could be your Strengths Finder assessments, certifications, courses and trainings, etc. When we have in-person interviews, we recommend that our clients have a hard copy kind of brag book that includes all of these things for even the first interview that they have, but that could be something that you reference again, for example, during your salary negotiation. So just preparing the ask is the bottom line here. That's really important. And tip number 9, and we'll get to this salary research poll here in just a second, is to really be clear on your ask. So we talked already about what you want to ask for. And at the end of the conversation, or when you're ready to make the ask, you can say, based on my qualifications or performance, et cetera, I'm asking for this. And we usually recommend that you give a range. It could be around 2 to 5K, again, depending on the position in the industry. But then you can say, is that within your range? Again, having it be a conversation and asking questions. Then as part of this, be quiet and wait. This is when, after we ask a question, people tend to start, if they get nervous, they start to kind of say more things and they don't give them a chance to respond. So you want to be mindful of that. And if they haven't mentioned the salary range along the way during the course of your interview, and you feel like it's kind of time to ask here, then you can ask, what is the range? Can we talk about the compensation and what the range is for this position? So we're curious about going back to the salary research. If we can do this next poll here, that would be great. How many people have actually performed some salary research before? My guess would be that this one is going to be pretty high because I think most people have. Also, especially because there are so many different resources out there to perform the research on the internet. Now, I will say, as we're working on this poll, we realize that when you perform this research on these websites, sometimes you get a huge range. And we know that it's not always as clear and specific as we want. I'm kind of hoping that the LinkedIn salary research helps with that and is a little bit better in that regard. But regardless, it at least gives you a little bit of a sense of things. And this is why we would like you to talk with recruiters, headhunters, so you can get, a second opinion and narrow things down, and also colleagues in different industries or in the same industry, but different, roles or companies. So, Allie, yeah.
So it looks like we have about 79% of people saying yes and 21% of people saying no.
Okay, good. All right, so most people have, which is what we thought. I think this is also because we can get kind of a big range on different websites, like we said. I think this is part of why it's good to look at all 3 websites or different ones, because you can start to kind of take the average of those, and that might give you kind of, again, the middle of the range if you live in a place where salary ranges are kind of mid-range, lower if your location is somewhere else, like outside of a city where it's lower. So doing that research in multiple places is good. So tip number 10, and our last tip here as we move towards Q&A here in just a moment, is to practice dealing with those red flags. So we mentioned these at the very beginning, and it's really important. This is something that most people, I think, don't do or consider doing, is to be prepared for what their objections might be, or say no, or concerns, so that you can address those during the course of the conversation and you're not caught off guard. So you might identify like 2 or 3 red flags, and these are, for example, concerns they may have. And ideally, you have woven these into the course of your interview process the whole time. So they're either already addressed, but if you haven't, you can weave them into that conversation right then. So if they're going to come back at you and say, well, you don't have as many transferable skills or experience, or sorry, you don't have as much experience in this type of software, for example, you might say, understood, I get that, but I was able in my previous position to learn their new software within 2 weeks, and this is how I handled that. It could be that it's, that you may not have as many of the soft skills, or maybe it's industry specific experience that you don't have as much. So you want to be prepared to say, this is the experience I do have that's relevant in how my current industry is similar to the one that you are in now, okay? You could use testimonials in this case too to help address those red flags. If, for example, a red flag is a concern that you're going to be demanding a higher salary than they are prepared for, you can let them know right up front or during the course of the interview process why you're okay with a lower salary range. You have to be prepared for that and be prepared to accept it, for example. But you could say, just by the way, I am open to negotiating on salary, or salary is not my highest priority. I'm really interested in the position for XYZ reasons, okay? So it's okay to be direct and upfront about things, because again, the sooner you set the stage for the conversation to be open like that and transparent and direct, that's how they're going to handle it as well. And you're going to get further along and have it be a less tense conversation, if you will, because of that too, okay? And tip number 10 is to practice. And we can go ahead and launch our last poll here as we start to get to our last few slides here. Tip number 10 is to practice the conversation multiple times. Do so with a friend, a family member, a career coach like us, a mentor. You want them to give you feedback on not just what you're saying, the actual words, but how are you coming across? Are you confident? Is your tone correct? What are your nonverbals like? Because I have to tell you, when we do like mock interviews and salary negotiations with clients, it's so interesting. People, understandably, even with us, they can get kind of nervous, and we notice they'll start to ramble or, you know, whatever it is. And we're not always aware of it unless we're truly putting ourselves as closely as possible into that same situation. You're not going to know how you'll react. So it's great to have this practice. It's great to go on interviews that you may like as almost practice interviews. So you can practice this for jobs that maybe you're not as interested in before you get to the one that you're really interested in. This practicing thing is just so important in front of the mirror, like we said, and with other people too, to get that specific feedback. So what have we got for this poll?
So for this poll, we have 33% of people saying yes and 67% of people saying no.
Okay, understandable. We know that it's not always the easiest thing necessarily to find a mentor. It usually takes a little bit of time, etc. But we really recommend, even for beyond this topic, that you've got somebody that you can practice with who supports you or can support you with your career goals long term. Doesn't have to be someone you talk to every single day, but to work towards that will help you with so many different career goals in addition to this one. And this is obviously what we do with our clients all day long. As part of practicing, some of the other things we wanted to say, and then I'll show you our last two slides here as we get to Q&A. When you're practicing like the things that you're actually saying during the course of the interview or the negotiation itself, you want to make sure that you avoid any minimizing expressions. This is, again, when people get nervous, they'll start to say things like, oh, well, I think, or I'm not sure. And you just want to be mindful of those things. So with the practicing, it's coming across as really, really confident and paying attention to your nonverbals as well as the actual words you're saying too. One of the things that we tell our clients, and then I'll just go to this next slide here for just a second, is we tell them actually to kind of pretend in a way that they're like a newscaster on the news, that you want to be clear and direct and concise in your conversation with them and confident as part of it. But you're also like, you're not rambling, you're getting to the point. But so imagine in a way that that's what you want to do, like a newscaster or someone on TV who's interviewing or being interviewed, that you've got kind of that persona, so to speak, okay? So if anyone needs more help as we start to move to Q&A, and we know sometimes that some of the questions that come through are really specific, and it's hard sometimes for us to answer really specific questions when we don't have as much background too. So this is part of why we have a free strategy session. If anyone would like to take advantage of that, it's admin@halliecrawford.com. It is to get some additional advice, but also to learn more about our coaching services, okay, just to be clear on that. Finally, as we're thinking about conducting the meeting, couple of kind of final thoughts on the meeting itself. Do make sure during the course of the conversations, you're tying your accomplishments to the bottom line and value to that employer, what you can specifically do for them. And here's why I'm asking for more money, because I know that I can do X, Y, Z because of my past performance. Provide tangible results achieved, include those testimonials and kudos. Be prepared to provide a range of what you're asking for in terms of salary. And don't make it personal. Don't ever bash your previous employer. Don't talk too much. Don't take it personally if they can't offer you everything you want. Try to be as practical and realistic about the conversation as you can. And a couple of other things on the right-hand side of this slide is it's also important during your negotiations to know what your bottom line is. So you want to know what you're asking for and going for, but you also want to know what your bottom is. And you can't go past this amount or lower than it so that you know when you need to walk away. We said earlier, if they can't give you everything you're asking for now, ask them, is there a possibility that I could get a raise within the next 6 months based on performance or whatever it is? So ask, if it's not immediate, when could it possibly be? And then you consider with whatever their answer is, if that's okay with you. Ask them what the next steps are in terms of negotiating the salary. If they don't give you an answer yet, for example, say, no problem, I understand. When could I expect to hear back from you? And you can say to them too, I need to think about it overnight. It's okay to ask for time to think about what they've offered you too. And always be gracious and thank them for anything, just for their time and the conversations that you've had with them. And just make sure that you kind of co-create together next steps and create a follow-up plan. So you both know, let's follow up in 2 days or whatever it is, so that you both are clear on expectations for kind of next steps as part of the negotiation too. All right, that's it for me talking, at least this much for today. We'd love it if you would take out your pen and paper on your computer, write down one thing, one action step that you will take based on where you need the most help from everything that we've said today, whether it's practicing, whether it's writing out those accomplishments, whether it's addressing the red flags and being prepared for those. So go ahead and write those down. And we would love to hear what any of your action steps are in the Q&A box, as well as we'll go ahead and start answering questions as we go. Just as a quick reminder, if your situation is more specific and you want some more specific advice, for that strategy session, you can email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. And if you do have other questions later on that you think of, and it'll just take a second to answer, feel free to email us at that address as well. We can answer those too down the line. So Allie, how are we doing on the Q&A? I'm ready.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, so I want to preface by saying we definitely won't get to everyone's questions, so please do reach out to that email that Hallie has on screen. We'll start with a question that came in regarding a federal contractor position being significantly underpaid, especially when compared to an equivalent full-time role in the same position. So I guess, do you have any tips on how to negotiate a salary for a contractor specifically?
I would keep in mind, I will be transparent and say, for federal jobs, I cannot say I'm the world's leading expert in that necessarily. So I'm going to give a more kind of broad-based answer. When it's a contract position, you need to keep in mind the other kind of things. So for example, they are not paying for your health benefits. So you may say, okay, I'm asking for this amount. And part of that is because my health benefits, I would end up, and you do that research for it, for example, I would end up paying this amount, and like lay the numbers out a little bit more for them to explain why you're asking for that amount. For the areas where you may need to make up a little bit more for a full-time employee or against a full-time employee.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next question is from someone that said, if my salary is already the top of my job level, do you think it's reasonable to still propose a 20 to 30% increase when applying for a new job elsewhere, or would you recommend sticking to the last salary since it's already at market price?
It's a great question. I would say I wouldn't stick at market price. I would ask for more, but I don't think I'd go as high as 20 or 30%. I might go to like, 10 to 15% or something like that. But again, you can ask for the range and let them know, like, I would like to talk about this further, something like that. So bottom line, don't stick with what it is just because, but have your reasons for why you're asking for more. Maybe don't go that high, but then also be clear about okay, these are the reasons why I'm asking for more, and be prepared to maybe have to accept where you are now, or just a bump, or it could be that you get some other things. The other thing to think about is the organization where you're applying and that industry, and if things are going well, that's part of the thing to keep in mind too, like we've said. Good question.
Thank you, Hallie. So the next one is, do you have a recommended resume length? People often hear that it should be 1 page max, but then there are people who sometimes have resumes that are 2 to 3 pages in length.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it depends on how long you've been in the workforce, and sometimes it depends on industry. And yeah, those are the two things I would say: how long you've been in the workforce and how much experience you have, and sometimes on your industry. The typical for us, unless you're a more recent college grad and maybe like only 3 or 4 years out of college, is for 2 pages. So that's what we normally see. In some cases, every once in a while, someone will have a 3-page resume, but that's usually more someone who's very senior in their career and has a lot of experience. So 2-page is the usual in our book.
Okay, great. Thank you. If you have a unique job that isn't necessarily discoverable on Glassdoor or another salary comparison site, how do you recommend finding out what an appropriate salary should be?
Yeah, this is a tough one. And what I would say is I might Google, just like use Google, and see if you can find, salary ranges for X type of position, because there could be some other websites out there that have that listed, or maybe blog posts that talk about this or something like that. And as part of that, this is where doing like quick informational interviews with other people, or if you can find some colleagues, or this is a great way possibly to leverage your Georgetown alumni networking group on LinkedIn. There could be a few people that you could reach out to and say, I'm looking to enhance my job search. Could I ask you a couple of questions, and try to maybe get, like, is this a reasonable salary range for me to be asking for? So that's, kind of going through the grapevine a little bit more, maybe the way to go.
Thank you.
Sure.
What's your advice on the right tone to use when asking for a higher salary?
The right tone would be kind of like that, at least what I call it, the newscaster tone. So it's direct, clear, to the point, not too high pitched, not too low. Obviously, it depends on your voice and all of that. But I would just be really clear and like make eye contact with them, ask for what it is, and then be quiet, and that's it. And you want to just be mindful of being direct, not coming across as, not confident, but just have your sentence or two written out and practice it so that your tone is assertive, but not like also overbearing or browbeating them, so to speak, which I doubt anyone on the call would do, but just putting it out there. Good question.
When discussing salary research, should you mention conversations that you've had with other companies and what they offered as pay, or does that not show loyalty to your current company? So I guess, said in a little bit of a different way, how do you incorporate other job offer salaries when you're talking about your salary?
Sure. So I think it would be okay to say something like, I know that the industry or some organizations with our industry are offering XYZ. And then you don't have to necessarily go into detail about, which companies these were that offered you this. So I think it's okay to be kind of generic about it. And I wouldn't worry about loyalty about your company too much, because if those jobs were offered to you, or, then that's just part of being in demand, which is a good thing at the end of the day. So I would say something more like that without going into too great of depth necessarily, so that you don't breach any confidentiality. That's a really good question too.
Thank you. How would you suggest responding to a hiring manager who says there isn't enough money or room in the budget for any increase?
If they say that there isn't an increase and they can't do it, I mean, that's kind of the bottom line or the final answer, to quote whatever that game show is. I can't remember. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I think. You know, if that's the first thing they have said to you about it, you know, you could follow up and say, this is better on a conversation, by the way, not via email, so it doesn't come across as too pushy. But you could say, okay, and that's the bottom line, question mark, or are there any other, you know, ways to, are there any other things that I could possibly ask for, like some flex time or remote work? Or you might say, okay, if that's the answer right now, I understand. Could that change within the next 6 months to the next year? So that's where you could use that advice that we were talking about earlier a little bit more for that one. It's a great question.
Thank you. We still have so many questions coming in, so thank you guys for submitting them all. I guess the next question, and this is a great one, at what stage in the interview process do you suggest discussing salary and negotiating?
Sure, it kind of depends on when they bring it up, if they do. So if they bring it up early on, you can go for it. Or you could even ask, like, you know, I know you mentioned salary. Is this an appropriate time to go ahead and have that conversation, or should we wait till later if they've brought it up already? And then they'll tell you, you know, what you all should do. If they haven't brought it up, in like the third interview, give or take, again, it depends on, you know, how long the interview process is. But if you're feeling like you're getting close to them offering you something, you can either wait for them to bring it up, or if they don't and you know that it's really close, you can say, you know, could we talk about compensation either in this conversation or in the next one? It's a good question, very common.
Thank you. Next question, what are your thoughts on the advice to let the employer set the salary first to avoid you setting the bar too low by suggesting a salary?
Sure. So this is, I think, similar to what we've said to a certain extent. So let me say a couple of things. So first of all, remember that in some states it might be illegal for them to ask you what your salary is. That said, that some employers may still ask. So you just want to be mindful of that. And if you're concerned about that and you want them to mention it and bring it up first, that's where you could wait a little bit longer, for example, and you could just wait for them to make the actual offer and then have the conversation. So you just kind of wait it out and don't say anything about it. That's one way to approach it. Good question.
Thank you. We have time for just a few more. So the next question is, how soon after getting a job and starting should you bring up getting a raise?
That's a great question too. It depends on if you've had the conversation or if you all tried to negotiate during the course of when you were hired in the first place, right? So I would say if there was a plan in place, obviously you can bring it up sooner or during that time frame. If it wasn't brought up at all, find out what the company's policy is typically on giving raises and promotions, and you can find that out in the handbook or by asking HR. So going to HR, maybe talking with them about it before you talk to your boss is one way to approach things. And then I would say, you know, like, I think 6 months is kind of too soon. Usually it's a year into it. But if you're kind of antsy for things, you know that, you know, the company might be a little bit open to it, et cetera. Like 6 or 8 months in, you could maybe briefly have that conversation with your boss. Again, if you have that, you know, if you have good rapport with them. But in other cases, you may want to wait at that year mark if you know, like, okay, annually, this is what they do. It's a little bit situational. It's a good question, though.
All right, we have time for just one more. So for everyone's question who I didn't get to, like I said, please do reach out to Hallie. So for this last question, I guess we want to know if an interviewer reads the salary amount and asks the person to indicate whether or not that they understand that that number is the salary, does that mean there's no room for negotiation at that point?
It could, but I would ask and just be direct and say, thank you for sharing that with me. Does that mean that this is the range for the position or the number for the position and it cannot be negotiated? So I would just ask, honestly. it could mean that, and I would be prepared for that answer, but just go ahead and ask. Again, questions. We want it to be a two-way street conversation and you not to feel like, oh, I have to figure this out, and it gets tense like that too. It's a really good one though. I like it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Hallie, thank you for taking the time to share these insights and your expertise with our alumni community. And thank you all for joining us today. Please look out for our follow-up email, which will include the recording of today's session, the handouts, and a calendar of our upcoming programs. Thanks again, and Hoya Saxa.